All right, well, welcome everybody to our final discussion session in the series that the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion organized on cultural humility perspectives. I'm your moderator for today's session. My name is Dr. Subbaswamy, Anjali Subbaswamy, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Pediatrics. I was invited to be part of this really exciting experience by my colleague, Dr. Alberta Kong, who also is in the Department of Pediatrics. So I want to thank her and our department and the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion for really putting together such a timely and thoughtful series of discussions for us. Thanks also to the audience members who took time to join Friday before holiday weekend. Really appreciate your interest. And please do check out the recordings of the prior sessions. They are available on the website, and I think some really interesting things were discussed. So we have 3 panelists today, and all 3 panelists and myself are all from India. We are from different parts of India. And let's dive right in. So our first panelist is someone that a lot of you might already know. Her name is Dr. Pandhi. She is a professor and vice chair of research in the Department of Family and Community Medicine. Dr. Pandhi, can we just have you say hello and give us a couple of words?
Sure, happy to. Hello, everybody. Glad to have you here and looking forward to talking to you. So, yeah, I've been here at UNM for about 3 years, and you've heard some of my titles. I'm also have a couple other hats I'll just quickly mention that are relevant. So I'm part of our new Inclusive Excellence Council, where I represent the Clinical Translational Sciences Center, and I'm co-associate director of our Clinical Translational Sciences Center as well, and I do practice clinically as a family physician.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us today. Our second panelist is Dr. Muttil. He's an associate professor in the Department of Pharmaceutical Sciences in the College of Pharmacy. Dr. Muttil?
Absolutely. Thanks, Anjali, and thanks, Dr. Kong, for organizing this and having me in here. It was a wonderful experience. I was at this event on Thursday, 2 days back, and it was such a touching moment to just listen to the 3 participants there. So hopefully people would just come to know our backgrounds a little bit. So I joined UNM in 2010. I came here in 2009. So it's been 11 years I've been in the Department of Pharmaceutical Sciences. As Anjali said, associate professor in the College of Pharmacy, part of the Health Science Center. I do, all of my work is basic research into drug and vaccine delivery, no clinical work involved, and I will stop here.
Thank you. We'll hear more in a few minutes. And then our third panelist is one of our medical students, second year medical student. Her name is Fabiha Sabin. Fabiha, I want to say hi.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Fabiha Sabin, and yes, I'm currently a first year going on to second year medical student at UNM. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and I'm just really glad to be invited in this panel. I have been a part of UNM since my undergrad years. That's where I graduated from with a degree in medical lab science and psychology. And now I'm just really glad to be here at UNM School of Medicine, and I'm learning a lot as I go along my journey of becoming a physician. So thank you for having me.
Of course, so glad you could make it. She just finished an exam and came right over, so good timing and good multitasking on your part. I think we could go to the next slide, please. So just to get us all on the same page and to have the discussion sort of in a shared mental model, I'm going to read through some of the points on this slide. So it's a little wordy, but I think the words are actually important. So we'll go through that. What is cultural humility? I had to actually look into that a little bit myself, and I found a really good TED Talk by this one lady. And the point, I think, is captured well on this slide and the next slide. It's a lifelong process of genuine interest, genuine humility, genuine respect, and learning about someone who's different than yourself. And it's significantly different from competency, humility versus competency. So the first bullet point here says it's a humble and respectful attitude towards individuals of other cultures that pushes one to challenge cultural biases. And then the point where it's different from competency is here. You realize you cannot possibly know everything about other cultures. And therefore you approach learning about other cultures as a lifelong goal and process. So really, I think wonderfully stated, like slow it down, open your mind, don't assume you know anything. And it's not about being right. It's about experiencing it with the other person in an open way. The second bullet point emphasizes cultural humility is maintaining a willingness to suspend what you think you know about a person based on generalizations about their culture. And this is a great point because unless you pause and ask yourself, what am I assuming? You probably don't even realize you are assuming things. And this applies to different genders, different ages, and definitely to different cultures. The other thing is we shouldn't assume somebody's culture based on what they present to us in terms of their looks, their skin, their clothes, their accent. There's so much more to it than that. So suspend what you think you know and really listen with an open mind. The third bullet point on this wants to emphasize to us that those who practice cultural humility actively work to increase their self-awareness of their own biases and perceptions, and then subsequently to intentionally engage in lifelong self-reflection about how to put these biases aside and learn from others. Thanks. So this one really emphasizes the difference between cultural competence and cultural humility. Competence is a good place to start, except for the word competence. We should never think we've learned that, we know that, we are skilled at this. That is counterproductive and oxymoronic. So probably a term that's going to be phased out over time, but it still exists in the conversation today, and it is distinctly different than the concept of cultural humility. So cultural competence is the ability to engage knowledgeably with people across cultures. Humility is an active commitment to lifelong learning, self-reflection, and the pursuit, in our case, of institutional accountability for these things. So an individual commitment that collectively becomes an institutional commitment. All right, so before we dive into this, just keep this slide on if you don't mind, Meg. Before we dive into this, I invite any additional thoughts from our panelists on those two concepts that we just discussed. Anything you want to add, contradict, clarify? Mm-hmm.
So thanks, if I may start here. So Anjali, I mean, these are really good points that was brought up in the previous slides. And as I talk about myself, I think I'll be touching upon some of those points.
Thank you so much. All right, so we'll go, I think, in the same order as we did our initial introductions. I want to encourage you all to do as the slide suggests on the right side. Oh, can you go back? Thank you. So as we listen to our panelists in the next 3 slides, I encourage you all to think about your own cultural beliefs and how are they maybe similar to what our panelists are expressing, or how are they different? Secondly, I encourage you to ask yourself, are you aware of your biases and assumptions? And did you become aware as you listen to our panelists? And then third, it's always interesting as you're reflecting to see if there might be any historical context that has led to whatever assumptions you currently hold. And usually historical context or major political events that target a particular race or a particular culture of people. One example that was shared with me was the internment of the Japanese after World War II within this country and within this state. I was surprised to hear that in New Mexico we had Japanese internment camps. I never learned that. I never knew that. So really a broader look at what goes into these assumptions. All right, so each of our panelists will speak on their Asian identity, their personal story of how they got here, and anything else they care to share. So Dr. Muttil, you have the mic.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Anjali. So yeah, I think this gave me a really good chance to just sit back and reflect on my journey in the last 15 years. So yesterday and this morning, I did sit back and reflect the last 15, 20, 30 years of what actually made me what I am at this point of time. So I was born and raised in India, and those of you who know people from India, I mean, we sort of say I'm from North India, South India, West India, or and I actually have a very big identity crisis in the sense that my parents are from South India, but I grew all over India. So I traveled every 2 or 3 years, which I'll be coming to in a few minutes. So I came to the US in 2006, 15 years ago, to do my postdoctoral research at UNC Chapel Hill. Stayed there for 3 years, little over 3 years, and end of 2009, I moved to Albuquerque at UNM to join as an assistant professor. And since then, so it's been almost 11 and a half years that I've been in the College of Pharmacy. As I said, I moved, I would say every 2 or 3 years, I was moving all over India from one state to the other. My father was in the Indian Army, so that made him move. So as a small kid, you really don't like moving because you have to make new friends every couple of years, right? So that was the case with me. But on hindsight, when I look back, it gave me a really good experience now to sort of delve into the different cultures. So one of the things about India that I would like to say here is that we have, I think, still 29 states and 7 union territories, and each state is very distinct in the sense that when you cross the borders from one state to the other, you will see a totally different language, totally different way people dress up, totally different cuisine that you eat. So you might have heard a lot like, oh, this is a West cuisine from the West side, or Mumbai, or this is from Calcutta, right? So we have everything different. So that's something I think I learned growing up, that everything is different. There is definitely different cultures within India. The other thing was something that I was taught from a very young age was religious tolerance. I mean, growing up in India, which I didn't know. So every Sunday we were, as part of the military, we had to go to the temple, we had to go to the mosque, we had to go to the church. So that was like a routine that we had to do, that you have to respect every religion in there. And I think that's how sort of I grew up. So stayed in North Carolina for 3.5 years. So when I moved to US for the first time, I think definitely I saw that US is a melting pot of different different cultures and different religions. But overall, I found everybody to be really, really nice. I mean, I just loved the people that I saw. But when I came to New Mexico, and one of the things I've written here is that I have stayed here the longest. I've not stayed in any place for more than 3 or 4 years. So 11 years is like almost 3 times more I've stayed here. And I really don't have to say why, because the first thing that really I liked was the people here. I mean, the College of Pharmacy and my department is sort of a family to me. And of course, the Health Science Center, you expanded to the UNM. The people here are just lovely. And of course, the food, you cannot just miss the food. I think I gained sort of like 10 pounds the first 6 months I was here in New Mexico, because the New Mexican cuisine is like pretty much the spicy, the ones that I grew up back in India. So definitely fell in love with everything that we have here in New Mexico. And that's still the case now. So Meg, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so I'm going to start here with a quote from Mahatma Gandhi. I think all of us know who he was. So this quote is very apt for what we are having here. So no culture can live if it attempts to be exclusive, right? And this is what we grew up with. I remember one incident, and I usually tell people that my memory is not that good, but this was somewhere in the mid 1980s. I was still like a 6 or 7 year old kid. Our school went on a field trip, and as a 7-year-old, it was always nice to get out of school so that you don't have to attend the classes. So me and my friends were really excited. We got into the bus and we were taken to a movie theater where they asked us to watch the movie Gandhi. And those of you who have not watched this movie, Richard Attenborough was the director, and I think Ben Kingsley was the main character here who acted as Gandhi. And from a very young age, we have been taught to imbibe the teachings of Gandhi, and it's just not to be inclusive of all cultures. As many of you know, that it's non-violence. We got our independence almost 80 years back as part of Gandhi's revolution of being non-violent, being tolerant to other people, in other individuals, other cultures. So that definitely was sort of imbibed in me, and I think a lot of us. And I think the biggest influence definitely has been my parents and the school that I got to sort of include, to be inclusive to everything. So one of the points that Anjali was bringing up is that cultural competence versus cultural humility. So of course, I've traveled all over India before I came in here, but one of the things that I learned after coming here is that the US is even a much bigger melting pot, right? You have people from all different parts of the world literally in here. So one of the things that I would say me and my wife do, and we have been doing this for the last 10 years, is to travel different parts of the world. I would say different parts of the world, mostly in the US, but we have traveled to Asia, we have traveled to Europe. And rather than staying in hotels, in the last 5 to 8 years, we actually stay in people's house. And even just before the pandemic hit, we were in Tucson and we were staying in somebody's house just so that we can learn other people's culture. And one thing that I've seen, whether it's in the US or in other places, people are curious. And in general, people are just curious to know about you. They wanted to know about Indian culture, and I wanted to know, or we wanted to know how the people in the US or in Europe or in Asia live, right? And I think every day I'm learning. It's something that's, for me, it's a lifelong learning in here. And that sort of was the biggest influence of Gandhi, was definitely one of it. So can we go to the next slide, please? So this is Mother Teresa's quote in here. Your true character is most accurately measured by how you treat those who can do nothing for you. And I discuss this with a lot of people almost on a daily basis. I think I was discussing this with my student yesterday. And what this means is the power dynamics, right? You see power dynamics, whether at the political level, or you might even see between a mentor and a mentee, or something that I was discussing yesterday was between a human being and an animal, right? So we have to be very, very cognizant that when you're interacting with another person who doesn't have the power as you have to be very careful how you interact with that person. And I've seen that the true character of a person actually comes out with that. So when you deal with animals of any, whether it's a cat or a dog, you need to understand that we are at a much higher position of power. So there always has to be some compassion when you're dealing with that. And that's true with human beings too. So as I said, I traveled almost all parts of India growing up, and I actually lived, if people know where Mother Teresa's missionaries of charity. So in Calcutta, which is now called Kolkata, in the western part of India, I lived for 3 years here. So I'm very well versed with where Mother Teresa lived, and her missionaries of charities was basically for decades, she was looking after orphan and poor kids, the kids who just didn't have parents, didn't have food to eat, for anything to eat for even once a meal, right? So she came to India a long time back, and all her life she was taking care of it. So this is sort of one quote that I found very strong that sort of relates with me. So I will sort of end here with my last quote. Meg, can you go to the next slide, please? And this is another thing that I follow from the Buddhism is be kind, and you can be kind always. And this is something I try to practice. I don't know if I have reached the stage where I can say that where I am here, but this is something I try to practice every day. Be kind whenever possible. And when you look back, you can say that, yes, I can be kind in every realms of life, right? So this is sort of, I really try to do myself on a daily basis. Have I reached there? Maybe not, but I think, as Anjali had pointed out before, it's a lifelong learning. You have new cultures, and I think just mingling with people and just talking to people of different cultures has opened my eyes. And I think I've always been reciprocated, whether it's in the US or in other countries in Asia or in Europe. People are just curious to know how your culture works. I've really come across any place where people have been disrespectful. And having said that, it's not like people are not ignorant. People have been ignorant. We have seen that for the last 1 year or so, right? So I think what Dr. Kong and Anjali are doing here is fantastic, is to be cognizant that we are still in the learning process. And I will stop here, Anjali.
Thank you so much, Dr. Muttil. That was a lovely sharing of your story, and I felt like we were on your journey with you to how you started and where you are now. It's sort of a more mature and reflective state of mind. And I love how your 3 quotes, one was from Mahatma Gandhi, a Hindu, one is from Mother Teresa, a Christian, one is from the Dalai Lama, Buddhist. They were all great.
That definitely wasn't intentional. So you're right at this point of time. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And we'll have some time at the end for more discussion and sharing. So let's give the mic over to Dr. Pandhi so she can tell us her Asian identity, her story. And then the third thing really is if you have any tips for communication, which my 2 cents, it's a little bit different with Indians because English is almost ubiquitously spoken amongst many, many Indians, but there's other parts to communication. So Dr. Pandhi, take it away.
Great. So yeah, I just wanted to echo appreciation to Dr. Muttil because I really identified a lot with the values, and some of that might come out in the story that I'm going to share as well. So I am a first-generation American. I was born here in the US, and my family came from Punjab, which you can see is in the northern part of India. And you can see the distance that they came. And they first came to New York City. My dad was an engineer. So at that time, you know, some of the immigration restrictions in the United States had been lifted, which is, you know, when a lot of Asian Americans came to America. So that he was part of that wave. Came to New York and really didn't know anybody. You know, it was sort of the classic immigrant success story, you know, $10 in the pocket and sort of like the address of somebody scribbled down in an apartment where he was crashing with other immigrants. And then went to Chicago, was able to find a job, not as an engineer, but in a factory, but felt stable enough. So then my mother joined. Like many Indians at that time, like they had an arranged marriage. So they actually hadn't been married super long. So they were sort of getting used to each other and getting used to being in America. So we go to the next slide. So what you can see here is my older sister. We call her Didi, and in the languages, you know, we speak, there's often a different word for each person, so you can actually identify from the language the relationship that you have. So, you know, that was just to point out one sort of difference. I think here, you know, people can often be generic, like there's a whole level of aunties and uncles, which you kind of include for everybody, you know, and you don't really know. And then there's sort of your own relatives there by these names. So my Didi was born in India too, and she really took the brunt of kind of like the assimilation. And, you know, so you can see her, this is in Chicago in the 70s, she's wearing Indian clothes. But then my family, you know, some of the stories I got a little bit was around the hardships, but they often really framed the positive stories and sort of the adventure. So they loved to travel too. They didn't have a lot of money, but what they would do is sort of pack up very inexpensive Indian food that was portable. So like Indian breads, rotis, and, you know, chapatis, those kinds of things, you know, things that traveled well. And then they would hop in the car and go to a different city whenever they could. And that's where you can see them traveling. What they would do, which I was find really an example of sort of like creativity and innovation was they would find one of those open air tour buses and drive really slowly so they could hear what was being projected on the mic as a way to kind of understand and learn and not have to pay the, of course, the price of doing that. So there's great stories of all the places that they could visit whenever there was time or resources to do that. Next slide. So then, my sister, and I'm showing a picture from her, this is in the 90s. She is very much across as over time, she's really stayed very much within the Indian culture, I would say. So she had an arranged marriage herself. And, she lives in Illinois where there is a large Indian community, and really a lot of her friends and, kind of her life is sort of expression of like being an Indian American with a large community there. Next slide. Now, for me, I was our first American child, so it's a little bit different. And I met my husband in college. He's Chinese American. And both of us were not even knowing we were going to go into medicine at that point, but we're both family doctors now. And if we go to the next slide, what you can see here is, so our children have really grown up with the richness of kind of two cultures, right? So you can see my kids kind of doing their Indian piece and going to the temple and doing that. And then in the middle, that's my husband's grandfather. He's 100 years old, still living at 100, and they're doing an Asian tea ceremony in Taiwan there with him. And, on the right, there's sort of our American identity, right, off vacationing overall. So it's been interesting, I think, for us is, one thing to point out in terms of a lesson is just that I think there is a lot of diversity we heard within India itself, and then also sort of diversity in the ways that it's expressed in terms of even, for people coming here and kind of how much of the cultural traditions or beliefs you keep, how much you stay within your own communities or, have a more like blending that melting pot identity. So just wanted to talk about that a little bit. Next slide. So I'm going to have some pointed things about medicine, right? So one other creative thing that my family loved to do was to send pictures back to India to reassure that their relatives that they were okay. And this was, of course, before the internet. So my father would have my mother get dressed up and stand in front of a fancy car in a house that wasn't theirs, just to show the relatives that they had made it and arrived. So that's what you're seeing on the left. And the reason I point that out is often, with at least the way it was culture was expressed in my family, you often dressed up because you sort of saw yourself as like a representative of the culture. So you go out and, that was always just a part of what you would do when you went outside into society is the word, that's what our family would say. You're going into society, you must dress, including going to a clinic. Now, my mother, you can maybe tell, is pregnant with me at this time of the picture. And one of the things that I would say, my family she was relatively traditional. So she was, vegetarian as a Hindu woman. And her first encounter with the medical system was when being pregnant. And they took a look at her and they're like, oh, there's no way you're going to have a successful pregnancy. You're so thin, you're not gaining enough weight. You have to eat eggs. And, that might sound like a minor thing, but as, a Hindu family, that was actually a big deal. And a bit of a struggle was to kind of like, oh, but this doctor, this authority is telling me I need to eat eggs. And so she did, but that was something later in life. I think she really regretted, like, why did I listen? And it led to some like conflict of like that happening. Another thing, that came up too was like, this was the time of formula being pushed. And so of the three, my siblings, I was the formula baby because the doctor said, oh, the formula is so much better than breastfeeding. So, in my family, there's a lot of sort of stories about, oh, those doctors, why did we listen? Is what I would say. So, and now I'm going to show, so there's me now in the right. And you can see that I'm really kind of bundled up. And that was part of culture too, as babies are like, dressed. That was something I learned from my parents. Oh, we're just worried you're going to get the cold. And if you get cold, there's sort of like a whole cultural explanation of why that might be complicated. But I'm, now with my American hat or Western hat, I'm like, boy, like my sister's like sitting there in a dress and like, short. And then here I'm all bundled up as a baby. And maybe that's why, I like the heat here in New Mexico. So next slide. just share, some of the other rituals that my family follows that can be common in Indian culture. So one of the things that is often is a mundan ceremony where you have a baby's head is shaved, and it's really a way of sort of giving up the life that you had before in a reincarnation structure, and leaving that behind, sort of centering you into the world right now. So this is my nephew having his mundan. So next. So I think the other thing I wanted to say, like you might notice, right? So my name is Nancy, and I think there can be assumptions even within the culture. My parents named me that as I was the first American child. So they gave me the American name compared to Arpana and Shashwat, my brother. But so with that, a lot of people, even in the Indian culture, make assumptions, oh, she must be Christian or not. But I actually grew up pretty traditional Hindu, and and here is the temple that's in our house. So for us, at least, coming together to pray as a family was really critical. And every night we came together to sing what's called Arti, like our prayers every night. And on the altar here, you can see that there's some of the different gods and goddesses that are within the Hindu culture, as well as a picture of my great-grandfather. So kind of honoring our ancestors is part of that as well. Next slide. So another part of us, and this is just showing the Indian community in America, we often had a lot of religious leaders. My family was very religious, and often that was a part of it, was to, invite folks. And you'll notice that they're in orange, and I just wanted to point that out too. So, within the culture, wearing orange is the color of fire, and it represents kind of the burning of your attachments to things in our material world. So being things such as like attachment to wealth or attachment to having a family even. So you'll see religious leaders in the Hindu tradition and other traditions are often wearing those orange saffron colors, as we say. Next slide. So my own father, I think, really came into his own Indian identity, and I just have a few more for the stories, but, and he became, with his engineering, actually started to teach yoga on the side. And what you can see up there is like some of the principles. Now he's back in India in this picture where he'd been invited to teach for several hundred of people in India. And he had quite a following in the US as well. But you can see this idea of avoiding medicine and drugs, right? Which is, I'm going to get to a little bit about that, but you have to think about that like within. So one hand, there's like the respect for science that was something we grew up with, but the other is this like avoiding of sort of things that might be considered unnatural as part of his teaching. On the right, you'll see my dad at age 80, still not on any medicines or drugs, and with several of his yoga students, they're expressing kind of appreciation for him at his 80th birthday. So next slide. So here's where I want to end, with just providing some communication, cultural humility tips. And I actually talked to my dad a little bit because, and he was kind of like, whoa, you get to do this? And he's like, I've got something to say. So it ended up being like several hours, but I won't tell you about that. But, I think he did give me some good lessons, and it helped me crystallize like what I want to impart in terms of communication tips. So I think one is just understanding that, people, it's at least within his culture and my family culture, like going to the doctor and as a preventive way was not like a natural thing that came within India. So if an Indian person, for him to go to a doctor, it really means there's something that's bringing him there to go ahead and do that. And so I think sometimes our model of like 20-minute visits and all of that feels very dissatisfying because it takes quite a lot to get there. And so, feeling like the person that you're seeing as a provider actually has some time for you and wants to know what you're about and what you're there is pretty critical. I think the other thing, I always laugh about this, and I don't know that I'm the best role model, but my dad always says that the people that, he'd go to see a doctor here and there and they would look half dead, exhausted. He's like, I'm going to take health advice from these people, so I guess he just continually sort of pokes fun at like a model of sort of not wellness within medicine culture that burns people out, fatigues people, keeps you up on call, but you're supposedly like embodying health. And so I think, I don't know if this could be unique to our own story, but I think there is a contradiction that's kind of present, hopefully getting some balance in terms of more attention to lifestyle. And that's the last point, is just like this holistic view, right? So I think, my dad shares stories of like the first time he went to a doctor was when he had a fever, and the doctor's like, oh, go take these medicines, go sleep. And my dad said, wait, but what should I eat? And the doctor kind of stared at him like, what? I don't care, eat whatever. And I think like that perspective, to him, like a fever is like an imbalance, and understanding how to correct that imbalance, and a bit of a more holistic view about, oh, maybe the wrong kinds of food, like this kind of food and it was cold, or all of that is part of it. So it immediately sort of diminished the credibility of the medical system for him and maybe for others. And so again, it's not that we need to pretend what we do know or not know, but knowing that those kinds of things, might be important to people in a broader view of health is something to reflect on. So with that, I'll stop.
Thank you so much. Those were lovely photos, great stories. We did have a comment from the chat that I would love to acknowledge for a moment. It's CSAKIEST, and he or she, sorry, I can't see, says, in the Hopi tribe, we also shave the baby's head at the 1-year ceremony. I think we can spare like 1 or 2 minutes here to hear a little bit about that if you would care to share. If you don't, it's okay, but I'm going to give you a few seconds here. Hi.
I'm Carla Sekiestiwa. I'm full Native American. I'm half Hopi and half Oglala Lakota. Thank you, Nancy. I met you yesterday in a breakout room, and the Hopi tribe actually has some similar. Some of the Native American tribes have similar practices as to the Asian communities, and I didn't know that the Indian culture did that with their babies, but we do the same thing, and it's all based around cycle. Baby stays with mom after they're born for the 28 days, and they stay secluded away from everybody. And then after 28 days, they're brought out, presented to the son, our grandfather, and then they're presented in the early morning as the sun rises by either by the elder in the family, elder male, so grandfather or father. And then the aunties will come together in ceremony. They will cook the traditional foods. They will give the baby a taste of the foods that they traditionally cook, so they will know the foods as they grow up, and it's their first presentation to the foods. Their hair is washed, the mother's hair and the baby's hair, and then they are also cleaned, but they're also put cornmeal flour on their face. So that's a part of a blessing because cornmeal is sacred. And every time cornmeal is ground by the young maidens, it's all a cycle. It's sacred and it's used in prayer. So when we do prayers, we put our prayers into the cornmeal and we give the offerings out into the world, into the land. And that's how we do our prayers. So it's very significant. So when I saw the baby with the shaved head, I was like, oh no, they do the same thing. Because it is the new start. It's the start of the baby's new life, because in Hopi, your baby doesn't get one name. They usually, at least 3 names are given. And whichever name sticks through that 1 year, that's when the name they'll keep.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful description, really vivid. And I love that. It's a shared human experience and 2 ancient cultures whose paths have never crossed, but who ironically are called by the same name by Westerners, have this very similar tradition. It's really interesting. Thank you. Meg, I think we can go back to the slides if you don't mind. And we would love to hear from Fabiha about her Asian identity and her story and what they do for 1-year-olds in her culture.
Hi, everyone. So I just wanted to thank everyone again for having me speak today. And I just want to start off by saying that the last two presentations have been just amazing. I think I'm just going to go a little more improv because I had a final, which I directly came from just now. But I think at the same time, it'll probably provide me an opportunity to kind of talk more from my heart in terms of, what comes to my mind. And I guess the first thing I want to start is how it all went back to when I was born. So I was born actually in Bangladesh, which is a tiny country next to India. We were actually a part of India for a very long time. And I was born in Dhaka, which is the capital city of Bangladesh. And it's honestly been such a great journey, coming all the way from Dhaka to here in the United States. As I think Dr. Pandhi already mentioned earlier, that it's more than 7,000 miles away from home in a way. But I think at the same time, it makes me wonder, what home means to me. And I think as an immigrant who moved here, in 2008, that's when I moved. It's made me really think about what it means to have a home and also what it means to, family, what it means. And I think that the biggest thing that I have experienced has been, a sense of community, which I was imbued early on in my life in Bangladesh. So I think that one of the similarities between Indian and Bangladeshi culture is that we really value a sense of community and family. Some of my cousins, they have like 5 different children. And then some of my other cousins have like 4 other children. And, we are, a whole big family, essentially, Bangladesh. And that's how I considered it to be as I was growing up. So it was kind of like that growing up, and the community was something that was really imbued in me. For example, there'd be weddings every weekend that we would go to, and we would live in an apartment. So there were a bunch of other families in that apartment as well. So, everyone was getting married. I think that's my first remembering thing that I could think about. And, with all that, there was a lot of celebration all the time. And not just celebration, there was also mourning. When people died, we would all gather together and we would mourn together as well. So I think it's kind of like a togetherness that was always a big part of my life. Same with entertainment as well. I grew up being a big fan of cricket, which is something that Indians and Bangladeshi people love. It's something that we all come together as one, even though we might hate something that somebody said, or, just we might not be getting along with each other. But when it comes to watching a cricket match together, we would all just come together and just be one. So that's something that, I really enjoyed growing up, I guess. Another thing was religion. It was a really big part of my life growing up in Bangladesh. I grew up next to a big mosque, which is where we go to pray. We have mosques pretty much like every other blocks in the city that I grew up in. And I think the part of having the mosques, nearby was kind of not just, a place for worship, but also as a place for coming together. And certain events would make us do that more easily, such as spending time in Ramadan. And that's one of the cultural things that I really want to mention, because I think Ramadan is one of my favorite times of the year. And unfortunately, we were not really able to spend this Ramadan in the pandemic as I would love to, with people around in person. But I think that kind of goes to show, how important these religious events kind of were in my life. We would just all come, huddle together during sunset, which is when we would break our fast. And then we would just celebrate every night. But at the same time, I think it's not just a time for celebration, but it was also a time for reflecting back on what we have. And I think that growing up in Bangladesh, I was surrounded by a lot of people who were poor, or, who did not have as much barons to themselves. And I think, having that time to kind of think about what do I really need, and how these basic necessities such as food and water mean so much to us, and how we can appreciate that was something that I grew up with a lot. Another thing that I also want to mention is that community-wise, I had a good upbringing, as my father was actually a family physician in Bangladesh as well. And so there were lots of opportunities to quote unquote shadow him, is what we call it here, I guess. I think it was just something that I naturally was attracted to, seeing my father interact with all the other people in the village that he was born in. So I think something that he really kept with himself was the need to give back to his community, which is something that I also really appreciated about him as well. So he would go back to his village and, he would just, talk to people and ask them how they're doing. And if they needed any medicine, or if they just needed to talk, or if they needed to get advice. And I think that's one of the biggest thing about Eastern and Western medicine that I have really come to grasp with, I guess, is that with Eastern medicine, it seems like there is a lot more communication. But it doesn't necessarily have to be evidence-based communication either, where your doctor comes in and he prescribes you the medicine that you need, and then you're done. Okay, see you later for the next visit. But I think it was really different in Bangladesh because a lot of people that my dad was providing for couldn't afford the medicine. But at the same time, these people wanted to hear something from someone who knew about medicine, who knew about health. And sometimes just having that shared conversation really helped alleviate a lot of their concerns. And I think that's something that we, a lot of the times, just kind of sweep aside because, doctors have a lot of things to do. They need to focus on, prescribing medicine, or, it's just 15-minute visit every time. But I feel like, at the same time, we also need to prioritize our relationship with our patients. And that's something which I have learned the most from my father, personally speaking. And I guess another big difference that I grew up with in terms of difference in Eastern and Western medicine was the power of holistic medicine. I think Dr. Pandhi mentioned it earlier too about how her dad would perform yoga, and that would help a lot in terms of his health as well. And that's something that is very prevalent in Bangladesh as well. And kind of going back to the religious aspect of it as well, as I grew up as a Muslim, we pray 5 times a day. And I think it is something that we do it, to show our love for God. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of mental healing and emotional, spiritual healing as well, which we do 5 times a day. Every day we pray. And it seems like it's such a lot of time, but it has helped a lot of people that I know who, have said that, it has helped them with their spiritual understanding and reflecting. So, and I think that's something that is very similar to what Dr. Pandhi was saying, at least in my head. But so kind of going back, I moved in the United States when I was 13 years old, and I was in 8th grade when I moved. So it was really different culturally speaking. And I felt very isolated because, as I said, everything was always happening around me in Bangladesh, weddings, funerals even, or, just the call of the imam, who is the head of the prayers in the mosque, and he basically gives a call every time there is a prayer. So, in a way, it was very comforting to me hearing that 5 times a day. That is something that I didn't really get to hear when I moved here because, it's really different. But I think overall, as time moved on and I got to experience New Mexico more, I went to high school here. I went to UNM as well as an undergrad. I got to meet so many people, and I had to have so many different experiences to kind of realize that I really do believe that New Mexico is actually a melting pot. I know that a lot of people say United States is, and New Mexico is kind of like huddled in a corner in the Southwest where, there's actually a lot of diversity here, which I really got to learn and appreciate. And the biggest thing that I really got to see was, I attended a local mosque here at New Mexico in Albuquerque. And I got to meet so many people from different countries. And we all got to come together and bond and share. And I think that is something that I really didn't get as much opportunity in Bangladesh, even though there were lots of different people and lots of different experiences. And it was like one big family. Here, I was able to pray with so many people, from so many different countries. Some were from Jordan, some people were from Egypt, some people were from India, some people were from Pakistan. And we even have some people who converted to Islam and they came and they were Caucasian Americans. So it was just really amazing to do that here in America and kind of sharing that oneness with Islam as a guiding force in my life. And apart from that, there were also other experiences as an undergrad, which I had. I was part of the World Student Alliance, where I got to share a lot of my experience with other international students as well. And I would do tour guiding with them and meet different people from Europe. And I actually made one of my best friends who actually came from Ukraine, and I got to spend time with her, and now we're pen pals. So, it's just kind of like all over the place, but at the same time, there was just oneness that I kind of really want to stress, which is kind of really hard to put into words. But I think I have an idea. I think to conclude all of this, I want to share one of my favorite quotes, which was actually my senior yearbook quote. And it's perspective is everything. And I'm not sure who actually came up with this quote, but I think it's a very common saying anyways. So I'm just going to go with that. But I think that's been a really big part of my life growing up, seeing different cultures. And I've come to realize that even though that people have different identities and different ways of dealing with health, their family life, anything, at the same time, we're all human. And having a shared identity of being human together is something that I really want to aspire as I go into the future. And so thank you very much for letting me speak once again. And I'm glad I was able to share my story.
Thank you, Fabiha. That was lovely. I enjoyed your journey as well, as you told us from when you were young and in Bangladesh, and then all the different stages of adjusting to life here. That was lovely. We have a few more minutes, and I would like to invite Chantel Trujillo. She put a comment in the chat. I think beautifully said. Thank you so much for sharing. You said Islam saves people, and I would have to agree. It saved me, said Chantel. If you feel comfortable, we would love to see your face and hear any additional thoughts that you might have, Chantel.
Hi, yes. So I actually I have kind of unstable internet, which is why I don't share my video. But anyway, yeah, I really appreciated that presentation. I just shared in the chat that I practiced Islam for several years, and it really did change my life. So to hear stories like that from other people on how transformative it is, especially in a world that kind of demonizes Islam and Muslims, I think it's amazing to share those types of stories.
Thank you. Love your comments. And I like that you used the term world, because I think it actually has many definitions if you apply Fabiha's concept of perspective. There's the world as it's shown to us through various news sources that we can choose to watch or not watch. There's the world in our immediate microcosm of our day-to-day lives. And then there's the world as it's shown through us through deliberate inquiry, like these sessions that the university has organized for us. So it's an interesting word, has a lot of meanings. Thank you. Any other comments? Dr. Kong. Okay, yay, Dr. Kong. Please share your thoughts. We would love to hear them directly from you.
Well, earlier we had a speaker, Dr. Lee from Korea, and I found it interesting. She had was giving tips on, speaking with our patients, and when patients are not doing well and may be dying, she was saying that really to that's kind of disrespectful actually to talk to them specifically about that. And that resonated with, I'm Chinese. So we also have the same thing, is sort of, it's almost like a taboo to talk about that. I was just wondering, like for then the Indian culture, what is, what's the appropriate thing to do?
That's a great question. I'm sure everyone has a slightly different take on it. Should we let Dr. Muttil have first stab at it?
Anjali, I was going to say that you might be better prepared. But Dr. Kong, the only thing I know is that back in India, I mean, not being from the medical profession, I cannot say how. So we don't really have any taboo to convey something like this. But there is a holy place back in northern India where people, if they basically go there and die. I mean, it's a place called Banaras or Varanasi in northern India where people in their old age go there and die there. They just think that that's the way it has to happen there. So it's a holy place if they die there. But beyond that, I really don't know.
Thank you. My personal experience with my South Indian Hindu family is that, reincarnation is the essence of life and the purpose of life. So you cannot have reincarnation without death. Therefore, death is a part of life. It's not a separate negative thing. It is an essential thing that is a part of life. And it's really not viewed as different from life, more as a part of life. Therefore, I don't think there's any taboo in discussing it, certainly not in the medical sense. I think it's broached openly and clearly. And of course, people react as you would expect. They collapse to the ground, they beat their chest, they wail to the sky and to the gods. Like, nobody's happy about it, but you can talk about it. Dr. Pandhi?
Yeah, I would agree with that too. That's kind of, my Northern Indian family would say the same. I do think though, like the way it's presented though is important. So I just, I'm reflecting on my mother's cancer and the way that the oncologist brought it up and, was telling the statistics and the dire and sort of like really going on about that. And my father cut him off and said, well, do you have anything positive to say? Because otherwise we get it, and I think like that's the thing. It's such an accepted part of it that you don't sort of, and sometimes Western culture will dance around it or feel like the need to. At least that was how it's been expressed. And it was just sort of like, yeah, duh. I mean, sorry to be an American there, but that's what it felt like, And so that's what I would say. Fabiha, I don't know.
Yeah, so I think mentioned earlier in my presentation too about death and how we spend our time together after someone dies. So it is something that we also experience together in a way. So I agree with Dr. Pandhi that we don't really have a negative connotation with death as much in Bangladesh or in Muslim culture, because especially in Muslim culture, because we believe in an afterlife. And we believe that life is essentially a journey to getting to afterlife. And it's a place where we learn and where we grow and where we become who we are. So death is just a part of that, and to reach afterlife. So I think essentially I would just kind of echo what both Dr. Pandhi and Dr. Muttil said, that it's not necessarily negative connotation, but at the same time, it also is when we can talk about it. I think talking about it is something that is encouraged, at least when I was growing up with my family.
It's so
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Kong.
It's so interesting because it's different. And, in Buddhism, there's a belief also in reincarnation, but there's still a sort of a taboo to talk about it. So I just find that I didn't know that. I'm learning so much from everybody during these the presentations. Thank you so much.
So just to add on to what Anjali and Dr. Kong you said, is that in the Hindu religion, they say that if you look at saints, they pretty much know when they are supposed to leave their body. So it's definitely, if you read the scriptures, they would say that my time has come to leave my body. And like everyone else said, that a life after this life.
So there was a comment from Dr. Rankin. He just said, thanks everybody for sharing. And I definitely echo that. Having a glimpse into your stories, into your families, into your thoughts was a really great experience. And I feel connected to people I've never even physically met. So thanks for making that possible. I think probably we should wrap up. It's 1:02. If there's any other comments or anything you'd like to share, please do so in the next 5 seconds.
I want to thank you, Dr. Subbaswamy, for moderating. What an excellent job. Thank you, Dr. Muttil, Dr. Pandhi, Ms. Sabin. Pretty hard finishing that final and coming. That's pretty impressive, and still with lots of spirit. I just want to give a shout out. I saw those pictures from Dr. Pandhi. That must be your creativity that you have from the Health Experiences Research Network that she actually founded. I thought I'd give you a plug for that because that was very creative with the pictures.
Oh, well, thank you. It was fun.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us on this Friday, and hope everybody have a great Memorial Day. Thank you all for your time. If we have a little bit of time at the end, if anybody has any questions, we can stay on for a little bit. And but otherwise, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.